Hello and welcome to Credit versus Q&A Wednesday live for December 1st. I am your host, David Michalek. Every week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we come together live on Facebook and YouTube to talk about credit. And as a consumer credit expert with nearly a decade of experience, I've conducted over 10,000 one-on-one credit coaching sessions to help people repair their credit and improve their credit. And I'm looking forward to helping you do the same. So during our call today and our time today, I'm going to be answering questions about credit reports, scores, the dispute process, and of course, if you have any questions about Credit Versio, I'm here to answer those as well. And to get started, I see that we've already got one question, and I'm going to roll into something that I've been preparing to talk to you about today. But Dueler McDouel, I love that. Okay, so this is a great question. Normally, I would hold off a little while to do the questions, but this is such a great one that I want to get this one taken care of because it goes into a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. So why is a written dispute letter better than an online one? Okay, so the laws that allow you and me and everybody else to challenge accounts on credit reports, and this is all based on the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970. Now, granted, the FCRA has been modified many times since 1970. I think the last big modification was sometime in the late 80s. But the staples, what's the core of the act has really not changed at all. It puts the burden of proof, it puts the burden of performance on the data furnisher and to some degree the Bureau as well. Now also, that ability to do that was designed for letters. Okay, we didn't have an internet back in 1970 when the FCRA was written. We barely had an internet in the late 1980s when the last big update to the FCRA took place. So everything that takes place in the dispute process was designed for the written letter. Okay, fine. So, well, we're not in that day and age anymore. It seems very archaic, and I agree. It really is. So what's the problem with an online dispute? Well, the problem with the online dispute is it wasn't made for you. It was made for the convenience of the data furnisher and the Bureau. And if you've ever read the fine print, there's a handful, and now this can be different from one platform to the next, but a lot of times you're waiving some of your rights. For example, an online dispute can be very restricted. It will prevent you from doing certain things that you can do in a paper dispute. Also, too, and this is one that's always been a little bit of a challenge, the bureaus can, upon your online dispute, remove information. They can make the call. Ultimately, they're responsible for the data on your credit report, so they can delete things without even consulting with the data furnisher. Well, what happens from time to time is they delete information. They don't tell the data furnisher that that's what they've done. And occasionally what happens is the data furnisher, let's just say it's, I don't know, American Express or, Ford Motor Company. Well, not knowing that the bureaus had removed something, when they do their monthly update, they can re-add that information. So we've probably all heard the question, well, is the stuff going to come back on the credit report? If it gets deleted, will it come back? That is almost entirely based on or as a result of an online dispute, in my experience doing this for about 10 years. So, Dueler, to answer your question, an online dispute it's not going to have quite the teeth that a paper dispute has. Case in point, let me give you, this is my last contribution to this part of the question. There's two friends of mine that I bring on occasion. John Alzheimer, who is on with me regularly, he's here twice a month, former FICO, and also former Equifax. So he was there at Equifax for 7 years. And a good portion of that time, he worked in dispute resolution for Equifax in Atlanta, Georgia. And he'll be the first one to tell you. In fact, he just did a video on another platform recently saying, hey, don't do online disputes. You don't know what you're agreeing to in the fine print. Same thing with another friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Steve Rieger, who was at TransUnion for 25 years. And for a large portion of that time, he used to run the entire dispute division for TransUnion out in California or the West Coast Processing Center. Same thing. He'll tell you, don't do online disputes. Stick with paper. You have a lot more recourse. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, welcome, Arian. It's good to see you. All right, so today I'm going to start out a conversation about the credit repair credit score relationship. Now, you can't talk about the credit repair process without talking about credit scores, and there can be a lot of confusion around the subject. So what I want to do, I want to start off with some key facts. Okay, let's get a good foundation for the dispute process for credit scores, what can happen, why things happen the way that they do. And if you've joined me for live Q&As before, you know that I really like to focus on credit facts, especially when it comes to the credit repair process, because so much of what's out there is just really, really bad information. Case in point, one of our customer service managers here, if you ever call in, you'll probably get a hold of Travis, was telling me about a podcast that he was listening to the other day and how much bad information was on this podcast. So they're getting play time. People are listening to it, and of course they're selling a product, and he's listening to this as a customer service rep, as a guy that talks to people all day, going, my gosh, man, these people don't know what they're talking about. Well, that's pretty rampant in the credit repair space. Not a lot of people like myself or John or Steve, or sometimes we have there's a couple of attorneys that we like to bring on that answer questions as well. Not a lot of fact checkers in this business. So what I want to do is let's start with a pretty good foundation for what's going to happen during the dispute process as it relates to scores. So let's go over to, I put a little PowerPoint together for you. And by the way, as I'm going through this, if you have questions, feel free to post them. That's what I'm here for. We can take a quick pause, and I'll be happy to answer your questions for you. Okay, so the title is Credit Scores and Credit Repair. We want to make sure we understand the difference between the two. And what I mean by that is, number one, your credit score is a grade that represents your risk level. Okay, so this is, regardless of what you hear, regardless of whatever preconceived notions that you might have, a credit score is always about presenting a level of risk or assessing your level of risk. Your credit score means something. So let's just say your credit score is a 700. Well, what that means to a lender, to a landlord, to your credit card company, that 700 means something to them very specifically, because they have a tremendous amount of data on what people do who have 700 scores, and what people who have 600 scores do, and what people who have 500 scores do, and everything in between. So your credit score is an assessment of risk. It tells potential lenders, anybody looking at your credit report, how reliable you and I are when it comes to honoring financial obligations that we have put ourselves under. All right, so number one, credit score is a grade. Number two, your score is 100% based on the accounts on your credit report. Okay, so it doesn't come from, your scores are not based on your income, your age, the kind of job you have, it's where you live. None of it is based on that. It is always based purely 100% on the information on your credit report. So all the debts that you've had, loans that you've had, anything that you have open now, that's where your credit score comes from. And there isn't anything externally that will influence that. For example, and I see this on occasion, and I'll touch on this in a second, or I'll explain this in a second. When people do disputes, and if their score drops, well, it must have been the dispute. Well, no, there's nothing about a dispute that shows up on your credit report. So what I want to show you here, and I'm going to come back to this graph, these pie charts. This is what makes up your credit score. I put both FICO and Vantage here. So FICO 8, that's the one that you're going to see most everywhere, and Vantage 3.0. There is a 4.0, but you're not going to really see that very often. If you look at these pie charts, we're not going to dive in deep into these pie charts. You can do that on your own time if you care enough to. But what you're going to see here is that the way that they factor scores are very, very similar. There are some things that Vantage score puts a little bit heavier of a priority on than FICO, and vice versa. But for the most part, the percentages of your score are pretty even across that pie chart for both FICO and Equifax. Okay, so next on the next slide, this is probably the biggest conversation in the nearly 10 years that I've had. And in the beginning of this video, I've said I've done 10,000, well over, it's probably closer to 15,000 one-on-one credit consultations. The fact of the matter is you could probably add another 10,000 onto that for all the customer service calls that I've done over the years, all the emails that I've answered, all the things like this that I've done, where one of the things I have to explain to people is that deleting bad credit, this is a big one, deleting or removing bad credit does not equal good credit. Okay, going back to number 2, your credit score is 100% based on the accounts on your credit report. Now, I want to give you a great illustration of this. One that I've done probably at least 1,000 times, because people have a hard time wrapping their head around this thing that happens quite frequently. Now, this I'm talking to a relatively, I would say 25, maybe 35% of people who are actively in the credit repair process, whether you're just doing it yourself, you're using Credit Versio, maybe you hired somebody to do it for you, or you got a big company doing it for you. This is always going to be a reality for about 25, maybe at the most 35% of those who are going through the process. And that is that they're going to see a really good, solid deletion percentage. Maybe 30, 40, 50% of the accounts that they challenge were deleted from their credit report. Fantastic success. Anytime you get an account deleted from your credit report sooner than the mandatory 7 years that is dictated by federal law, that's a bonus. I mean, that's a good thing. That's a great thing about the laws that exist to protect you and me and everybody else from bad information that's on a credit report. Now, it might have actually happened. Maybe if I had a charge off or something like that, and I really did default on that debt, maybe it was a while ago, but it's not reporting accurately on the credit report, I'm within my right to challenge that account to see if I can get it removed. Okay, it's a great thing. I love it. Now, one of the things you have to take in consideration with that is, does the removal of accounts automatically make things better? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It depends. Again, what does it depend on? Number 2, your score is 100% based on the accounts on your credit report. So let me give you my illustration here. By the way, let's just for good measure, let's throw in number 4 before I give you my illustration. Good credit's got to outweigh the bad credit for a better score. Okay, pretty common sense stuff. But like I said, let that maximum, maybe 35% of people who are doing credit repair really don't have anything on their credit report to elevate their score, meaning they've got a lot of bad credit. They went through a bad time, and by the way, I'm one of those. That's how I got into the credit repair space. I was a credit repair client a little over 10 years ago. I was one of those guys that got heavily leveraged back in the day when the great real estate boom that we had. And like a lot of people, not making any excuses, but I was one of those guys that got wiped out from it. So credit repair became an option for me that I really appreciated. It made a huge difference in my life. Now, I was one of those guys that when I went through the repair process, I got a lot of stuff deleted from my credit report within a couple of months, and it was a fantastic return for me. The problem was my score didn't really move all that much, because like a lot of people, what happens when you've got negative credit, well, you go credit invisible for a while, especially if you have something traumatic like a job loss or an illness or a lawsuit or a failed business, or if the big turn in the economy, which is what I experienced. What happens is once the credit goes bad, you don't open up new credit. Everything that you have on the credit report is just kind of sitting there as a collection charge-off in some kind of a state of negative reporting, and you just go invisible because you can't do anything. You can't get a new credit card unless you do a secured card. But I didn't even know that back then. So what's very common for people is you when you have bad credit, you just kind of you wrap up like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I'm not going to do anything. But that's going to play a little bit of a role in the credit repair process. All right, so I've been hyping up this example I've been wanting to give you. Okay, so here's the example I want to put in your head. The illustration that deleting bad credit doesn't necessarily equal good credit. All right, let's just say that I had a really rough semester. Real rough. You can see right here. I had 5 classes. I got 5 Ds. Okay? Question is, what's my GPA? Pretty easy, right? GPA is a D. D's across the board. A D is my GPA. All right. Now maybe these D's are collection accounts. Maybe these D's are child support payment. Maybe it's a bankruptcy. Maybe it's something like that. So let's look at D's. The equivalent is negative credit. Okay? And maybe my D is a 520 credit score. But let's just focus on the grades, because I think this is an easier thing to wrap your head around. Okay, so let's say somebody very generously decides to delete some of my Ds. Okay, I got 1 deleted here. Okay, maybe the next month I got another D deleted. Okay, look at this like somebody going through the credit repair process or seeing negative accounts being deleted from the credit report. And now I got a 3rd D deleted from my 5. So I had 5 Ds. Now I've only got 2. What's my grade point average now? Well, a lot of people are going to think, hey, I got to have an A+, right? I got all these collections deleted. I got a charge-off deleted. I got all this deleted. Shouldn't I have an A? Well, no. So what is a D? If I've got 2 Ds on my credit report, what's my GPA? It's a D. It's still a D. It's going to be a D. Well, how do I fix that? Same thing with credit. Same thing with me when I was a credit repair client a decade ago. I was getting all this negative stuff deleted from my credit report, but my score was just like, a little bit, just kind of bouncing around. That's because I didn't have any reason. I had no reason at all to give FICO or Vantage the ability to expect better things from me. I didn't have any credit cards. I didn't have a car loan. Self didn't exist back then. I think Self is awesome. So there was nothing there to raise my score. So the scoring models, both FICO and Vantage, all they're seeing is now I just got less bad stuff. But it's still bad stuff. You can't do much with it. So what do I need to do? Well, I got to add some A's. Okay, there's an A right there. Let's just say, I'm taking these classes over again. I'm throwing some A's on there. Okay, now I got 2 D's. Think of those as the negative items that just didn't come off. Okay, they were reporting accurately. They're going to age off normally. And those A's represent me doing something like I had a friend or a family member add me on as an authorized user. I went out and I got a secured credit card. I got Self. So I did some things to help me boost my score. As a result, now I got a C+. That's awesome. And these things usually take place in a matter of a few months. The repair process, maybe 3 or 4 month process. So that is an excellent turn of events. Okay, next slide here. Okay, now what I want to talk about is, and again, if you have questions during this process, please shoot them my way. That's what I'm here for. So now what I want to talk about are the things that are score killers. Now, last week when I had John Alzheimer on with me, John's formerly with FICO, also with Equifax, one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about is the holiday season and credit card usage. Now, granted, that it's one of the things you can't avoid. You want to have a good Christmas for everybody. It's very common for people to increase the balances on credit cards. But during the repair process, I want to talk about the things just real quickly that do a tremendous amount of damage to scores. So these are what I refer to as the top score droppers. Now, every time I have a conversation with a client in the 10 years I've been doing this, the question that gets asked is, hey, why did my score drop? I got a bunch of stuff deleted. Why did my score drop? Usually the default position is, well, it's because I'm disputing things. That's not even the realm of possibility. There are no punitive effects of disputing accounts on your credit report. That is your legal right. You've had it since 1970. So What are the things that drop credit scores during the repair process, or when people are going through the repair process? When scores drop, what is usually the cause? Now, when I say a score drop, I'm talking about 50, 80, 100 points. I'm not talking about normal score migration. Normal score migration, 25, maybe 30 points up and down, very normal, nothing to get excited about. Sometimes people do get excited because when they're in the repair process, it's the first time they're really scrutinizing their credit report and scores month over month over month. So when they see that score bouncing around, they think that there's something wrong, not realizing that it's totally normal. So what are these big score killers? Or I should say top score droppers. Well, number one, it has to do with credit cards. Typically, it's high balances and multiple accounts with balances. So I would say about maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a lady who saw a score drop of about 90 points. Couldn't figure out what it was. Actually, pretty easy to diagnose. When I looked at her credit report, she had her credit utilization, while it was about 80%. I think it was 79%, which is not great. I mean, you can lose a lot of points with a 79, 80% credit card utilization. Utilization is the credit limit that you have available on all your cards versus the balance that you have on the credit cards. That's your credit utilization. So there were two problems that contributed to her score dropping 80 points over what it was the month before. Number one is her credit utilization went up. It went up substantially. I think it went from about 26% to 79%. And then in addition to that, she had balances of her 16 different credit cards, which is perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with having a bunch of credit cards. The problem is she had balances on, I think, 13 or 14 of them. And I want to show you why that's a big deal. Okay, these are little things that really make that create a big problem when you're trying to get the best credit score that you can get. I want you to look at this chart real quick. We got Vantage and FICO score. And notice the arrows. If you were on with me earlier, you heard me say that the way that Vantage score and FICO calculate scores pretty similar, not much off. So on Vantage score, which I believe will be on your right, you'll see two arrows: utilization, which is 20%, and balances, which is 11%. So 31% of your score. This is the largest chunk of your score that you have control over. Okay, the rest is things like, or the next biggest is going to be payment history. You can see it's 40% for Vantage score. It's 35%